Okay, we're at the bottom of Mem Dalet and Aleph, 44a. Rabbi Yomi Rabasi, 3 lines from the bottom. Mochar Avdei Umeis, Mahu. Mahu Sheyiknesu Es Benoi Achrav. So we're talking about somebody who sells a slave to a non-Jew. And we pointed out that there is a penalty, and the penalty is that he goes free.
This is page 44A. Yeah, and you say 3 lines from the bottom of the page?
Yep. So he said that not only is there a penalty that he goes free, but also there's a penalty that he's obligated to redeem him from the non-Jew and then set him free. So the question is, it's a penalty. It's sort of it's not a justified payment. It's a payment that you're made to give because of the fact that you did something wrong. What about his kids, his inheritors, the estates? They didn't do anything wrong. Are they responsible to pay the penalty of the guy of their father? So the Gemara says, "Imtim tzelem tzarim oitzim bechar umeis konsu b'nei acharav mishum disur deraisi abul haki isur derabanan." So, for example, if you have a kohen who has a firstborn animal, and instead of bringing it as a sacrifice, he's a bit lazy, so he causes the animal to get a mum. He gives it a blemish by making a drawing blood from the ear. So in that case, that penalty was given not only to him but also to his children. What's the purpose here? If once it has a mum, once the bechar has a blemish, the kohen can eat it without bringing it to the temple. So what's the penalty? We don't allow him to eat it.
It's on 44A.
44a. The penalty is he may not slaughter the animal. So there's no way for him to eat it. So, but over there, he violated an Isser Deraisa. The violation, the prohibition is not to take an animal that's fit for sacrifice and to give it a blemish. But over here, it's only a rabbinical prohibition. The intim, okay. So in other words, that's an example of a prohibition where the kids are penalized, but it's not directly. It's not a direct comparison because it's a biblical prohibition. Okay, and let's say he'll say, here's an example of a rabbinic prohibition. What's the rabbinic prohibition? It's forbidden to work on Chol Hamoed unless it's urgent. So, but obviously it's pretty easy to set up that things should be urgent. So the guy could have done something earlier, decided not to do it. Now it's later and now it's urgent. He's allowed to do it on Chol Hamoed. In that case, there's a rabbinical penalty as well. However, we do not penalize his children. So the Gemara says is the reason we should loy of it surah because over there it's a bit different from our scenario as well. Over there it isn't a direct prohibition to arrange that on Chol Hamoed you should have urgent work. You follow? He played a game here, and that's where the rabbis gave him a penalty. But there wasn't a direct prohibition that he violated. Over here he did. It was a rabbinic, but the rabbinic prohibition is not to sell him to a non-Jew, and yet he violated. Whereas over there, you sort of game the system.
Yeah, game the system. Yeah. Teach him a lesson.
Yeah, 1 second. Okay, hold on. Hachamai, what's the story here? The two kinds are about on V'holasa. Did he give the penalty to the guy who actually sold his slave and he's dead? He's not here anymore. Or is a penalty on his money? Isa and his money is still here in the hands of his estate. He responded to him, Tinisua. We learned something similar. So on Shemitah, the 7th year, you're not allowed to do work in the property. First example is Sheniskavtza, which means you remove the thorns. Now, the Torah restricts work inside the land. this is not considered work on the land, work in the land. Removing thorns is not, it's sort of cleanup work. That's not considered work in the land. And therefore, in that case, Tizra L'Matzah Shvius, immediately after Shvius, he's allowed to plant his field. However, in the Tyra or in the Daira, either he sort of fertilized it by working the manure into the field, or arranging that animals should be there and putting it in. You should not plant that field after Shemitah. It's a penalty. For Rabbi Yossi says, we learned that, let's say he did fertilize his field and then he died. His kids could plant the field immediately. Alma, evidently we see the rabbis gave a penalty to him and not to his children. And that concludes the proof that we need that penalty was for him and not for his kids. Similarly, Amar Abaya says, Naktina, we learned Tima Tahara Shachavere. Let's give a little bit of background here. We spoke about this once before. We'll get to the main sugya in about 2 weeks. Hezek Shein and Nicker. You damage somebody in a way that there's no apparent damage. How do you do that? There's a few ways to do this. Yayin Esach is a good example. You take a very expensive bottle of wine, you go in front of the idol worship, or you go in front of the church, and you was the Catholics pour wine or something, right? Is that right?
They probably pour over something sooner or later. Yeah,
I think it's the Catholics that pour wine by the mass. That's what happens. They drink wine. So you go ahead and you use this bottle of wine and you pour it back into the bottle and you cork it up again, and no difference. Nobody knows the difference. But a Jew is no longer allowed to drink the wine. This is yayin esach. It's not stam yainam. Wine that was poured for Avodah Zarah. Alternatively, the guy was a kohen and he had truma, and you went ahead and you made all the truma tummy. This is also has a shein and nicker. There's no way to know the difference. Another example we pointed out is paraduma, red heifer. The 6th parsha, right? You cannot have work done to it. The guy went ahead and did work with the animal. There's no difference in the animal. All these examples are called hezek shein and nicker. Amar Abaya says, Nektinim, we learned tima tahara shechaveri. You made your friend's stuff tummy, especially if it's truma. The depreciation is massive because it can no longer be eaten. Umeis and he dies. Loy konser bonon b'nei achrav. The rabbis did not penalize his son. My time. What's the reason? Hezek shein and nicker loy shmei hezek. Such a type of damage that there's no apparent difference is not considered a damage. Rather, it's a rabbinical penalty. The penalty was given to him, but not to his children. Okay. The next example we had in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, was somebody who sells his slave outside of Israel. Says we'll see it's a little bit more nuanced than that. You sell your slave outside of Israel, he requires a emancipation, and he goes out free. From the second master, i.e., the sale is valid, and we'll get to that in a moment again. Shimon says, sometimes he goes out free, sometimes he doesn't go out free. Ketzad, how does this work? Omar Pliny Avdi Mechartiu Lepliny Antuchi. He says to his slave, I'm going to sell you from this person from Antuchi. Antuchi is outside of Israel. I'll sell you to this person from France. Lo yatsa. He doesn't go out free. Yeah, I know. Very sympathetic to that. Yeah, just anyone who gets sold to France should be, even if you live outside of Israel, should be free. Okay. So this guy from France, he still doesn't go out free. Why not? Because the fact that he came, the presumption here means that he comes from France. Maybe he repented. He's no longer a Frenchman. Now he lives in Israel. He's not a Frenchman. Then it's fine. Everything is fine. However, let's say he says the Frenchman who lives in France, effectively, Now, 1 second. So then Yotza, then he goes out free. In other words, because over here I know that he knows that he's being sold to France outside of Israel. So the Gemara says, "Vatanya mechartiu la'antuchi Yotza." If he says I'm selling you to the Frenchman, he goes out free. If he says I'm selling you to the Frenchman who now lives in Lod, l'antuchi shashor belod, lo Yotza, he doesn't go out free. The idea here is as follows. In other words, you have to sell him to somebody who's permanently living outside of Israel. If somebody's sort of going back and forth, or has lived outside but now lives in Israel, that's acceptable.
Once he's done the sale, how in the world can you inflict the penalty?
The penalty's on the buyer. The penalty's on the buyer. Why is the penalty on the buyer? We got to it. That's
But
top.
if the buyer's in the penalty,
So if the buyer, so here we're talking about a buyer who's a Jew, presumably. If the buyer is an idolater, then he goes out free even if he's sold inside of Israel.
right.
And then the penalty would be one of two. If he escapes, no Jew will put him back into servitude, and the master is obligated to redeem him, buy him back and free him,
That's in the case
where he's sold to a non-Jew.
Non-Jew, but in Israel, but in non-Jew outside of Israel, then,
So you'd probably still be obligated to redeem him.
but you can't, he's gone. And it's over.
Go find him. And,
Yeah, that's my point.
yeah, it could be. It could be that could be.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So there's a difference here between. So the Gemara asks, hold on a second. If he says, I sold you to the man from France, the Frenchman, Yotza, he goes out free. If he says to the Frenchman who lives in Lod, so it's a contradiction. In other words, Rav Shimon will be saying that only if you say the Frenchman that lives in France, that's when he goes out free. But if you talk about the Frenchman, then presumably it could be a Frenchman who lives in Israel. He abandoned his heritage. Good riddance. And therefore, according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, he should be. This guy should not go out free, but the Brisa says he does go out. So what's the difference? Like Kasha, it's not difficult. Hada Islay base of Eretz Yisrael, Hada Islay Ushpiz of Eretz Yisrael. So this guy, in other words, this Frenchman lives in Israel. If he says the Frenchman who lives in Lodz, 1 second, that means that he has a house in Israel. You sell him to a Frenchman who has a house in Israel, he's no longer a Frenchman. That's all it takes. All it takes for a Frenchman to buy to lose his heritage, it's just buy a house. That's all he needs to do. Yeah, obviously. Yeah. However, let's say his Frenchman owns an Ishpiza, sort of he's a guest there. He doesn't really own a house. In that case, he's considered a Frenchman from France, and therefore the sale is not valid. Sorry, take that back. The sale is valid, and he goes free. But Rabbi Yirmiyah says, this is a very interesting question. So we spoke about when a woman gets married, she has two types of assets. There are two types of assets that she brings into the marriage. There's what we call nechsei malug and nechsei barazon. Nechsei malug, these are typically regular assets that, come and go, and they have a certain lifespan of use, and people don't really, eventually they break down and they're disposed of. And then there are assets that are sort of longer term investment assets, something equivalent to what would be given for a dowry, and a nadin. See, for example, we give the example of the car, especially if it's a cheap car, it's going to be driven for a couple of years and it's going to go into the garbage. Unless stated otherwise, the husband is allowed to drive the car until it dies, and then the car is disposed of, and that asset of the woman came into the marriage with, if she gets divorced 10 years later, she will not get back. The car will be in the pick apart, whatever, and that's it. It's done. However, there's another type of asset as well. Let's say she comes in with $1 million estate that she got from her grandmother, or 10 million or 100 million, whatever it is, whatever it may be. So that might be written in the ksuba as a nadin. In other words, this is a dowry. He will be able to enjoy the income of that asset, but he won't be. But if they get divorced, he has to return the asset as is.
He has to return the principal.
The principal.
Return what's left.
The principal.
Okay,
He's expected to make sure that the asset doesn't depreciate needlessly. unlike a car, which is going to go to the, has a certain lifespan, these are things that are more investments, less so life typically, although obviously you can play around with this however you want. Okay. So here's the question. So you have a woman, Ben Bavel, Shanasa Isha Beres Yisrael. This woman marries somebody from Bavel. So slaves, in this context, were brought in as part of Nichset Sain Barzel, right? Sort of the dowry. The dowry is that she has a group of slaves. Okay, and the husband intends on going back to Bavel. So now the question is, whose slaves are these? Did by this marriage are the slaves sold to the husband, or do they still belong to the woman? And now there's a fundamental question, which is in such a scenario, at the end of the marriage, let's say the husband says, I want to keep the slaves, I'll give you money instead. Does that work or not? Who's right? Hadin imai or hadin ima? Is the halacha with him that he's able to substitute money for the asset, or is hadin ima, he cannot? She has a right to say, I want the asset over money. And it depends also, perhaps if it's a family estate, then perhaps the halacha is different. We spoke about that in Ksubas. Okay, so this is the question of Rabbi Yehudah. Mahu. This question will be true whether the halacha is that he is on the upper hand to decide whether he wants to substitute money for property, or on the opinion that says she has the upper hand. She can demand property over money. The question will be true according to the opinion that says the halacha is with her. Since the halacha is with her, that she has the right to choose property over money. Do we say that these slaves are hers and therefore they do not go out free? Or do we say or do we say no? Since the husband earns the income, he's able to use the slaves. So therefore, it should be as if it belongs to the husband, and it is a sale, and they should go out free. Similarly, the question would be true also if he does have the right to substitute money. Do we say it's like his, and therefore it's a sale, and they go out free? Or you would say that no, ultimately speaking, he only acquired the income, not the goof. They still belong to the woman. Therefore, it's still considered hers, and it's not like a sale. And the Gemara says, "Teku," it remains unresolved. Amar Bavu says, "Shanali Rabbi Yechon." Rabbi Yechon taught, "Evet sheyotza Rabbi l'Syria," a slave who went with his master to Syria. Syria. So if you look at Syria, let's just try to describe Israel here very briefly. The borders of Israel that were promised to Jewish people are enormous. I believe it's the Euphrates or the Tigris. So it's going well into what is that? Iran, right? It's going as far east as Iraq. I'm sorry, correct. It's going as far east as Iraq, right, as far north as halfway into Lebanon, closer to Turkey. These are the Har, which is far north. I believe it does include Sidon and Tyre as well. Although when you look at the southern border, it does not go as far as Eilat. It goes as far as the Nachal Mitzrayim, the Egyptian river. Where exactly that is, I'm not sure. And then it goes a couple of cities, but it does not go as far. It does not go as far as the Red Sea. Now, when they conquered Israel, they did not conquer the vast majority of this territory. Remained unconquered. It was mostly the land, a little bit of land outside, across the Jordan River. Mm-hmm. Most of the land that we have in modern day Israel, from the Nachal Mitzrayim up north, through a little bit of Lebanon, but I don't think that they got that much further. And then as far east as some amount of Jordan or Transjordan. David HaMelech fought a bunch of campaigns in the upper portion of the Golan Heights, that would be past the Hermon Mountains, and he conquered Syria. For the time while David HaMelech was there, Syria had the halacha of being as part of Eretz Yisrael. As soon as he left there, it was no longer part of Eretz Yisrael. This has to do with the laws of conquering. Really depend on the second conquest, which was the conquest of the people that came up from Bavel. whatever the people that came up from Babel conquered, that is part of the sanctified Israel today. Now, 1 second. So you have a slave whose master took him to Syria. Syria is not considered part of Israel. Machusham Rabbi, at least for this matter, and we've seen this previously in the Gemara, first parak. Different things in which ways that Syria is different than Israel. Umachusham Rabbi, in Syria, his master sold him. Yotz l'cheres, he goes out free. Okay. So the Gemara says, "Vatani Rav Chia ibed eskusay." Rav Chia says he's lost his right. If I borrow us for a second, sure. Okay. So Rav Chia says, ibed eskusa, because the slave voluntarily left Israel, so he has no right. Now he's outside of Israel. He sold him outside of Israel. Okay. So we have a contradiction here. The first opinion says that even if you voluntarily took a trip with your master outside of Israel and you're sold outside of Israel, you go free. And Rav Chia says, no, you lost your right to emancipation by voluntarily leaving Israel. So Mara says, "Like kasher, it's not difficult. Kanch das Rabbi Lachser, kanch ein das Rabbi Lachser." It depends if the master has intention to come back to Israel. So Mara says, "Vatanya yotza ha'eved achar Rabbi l'Surya." Yotzi ha'eved achar Rabbi l'Surya. Yotzi. 1 second. Sorry, a slave can go with his master outside of Surya. So Mara says, "Yotzi le'sagid le'nafik." 1 second. Okay. So the Mishnah says that a slave should follow his master to Syria. So the Gemara says, does he have to? He's not obligated. He could choose not to leave. Vachanam, we learned. This is an interesting rule. So we're talking here about somebody who sells a slave outside of Israel. Slave goes out free. But moreover, if actually the master cannot even force the slave to leave Israel, but now we learned you can't force him to leave. If the slave left of his own accord and followed his master to Syria, if the master had intended on returning, so then the slave goes out free if he sold. If the master had no intention of returning, the slave does not go out free if he sold. Amar Ravanan says, "Shamet minei dimar Shmuel tarti." I learned two things from Shmuel. Chodahach, one statement was this, that if the slave voluntarily leaves Israel on a long-term basis, he could be sold. If not. V'idach, and something else. So we know that all property in Israel, in the time when Yovel, the Jubilee, was in practice, every property would go back after 50 years, unless it was property sold in a walled city, in which case it was a security risk. All property would go back. So he sold property, effectively it was a long-term lease until Yovel, which could have been 49 years or it could have been a year. What happens if you sell property on Yovel itself? So if you sold property last year, it's going to go out free this year. So for surely, if you sell it this year, the sale shouldn't be valid at all. So we have a debate here. Rav says the sale is valid for half a year or whatever it is, and then the property goes back. Shmuel says the sale is not valid at all. But what's interesting is I learned something else as well. I learned b'choda hadra zivini or b'choda loy hadra zivini. Le'adana haiminayim. So what I learned was as follows: you sell your slave in Chutz La'aretz, your slave goes out free, presuming that he left with the intention of coming back, then he goes out free. If you sell your property on Yovel, sale is not valid. In one of these instances, the money goes back to the buyer. In the other instance, the money remains with the seller. And I didn't know which one it was. Rav Yosef says, I'll figure it out. Midatani Bryce. So the Bryce says, who has to write him out the emancipation? The second master. Evidently, that's because the sale is valid, and the second master loses his money, and therefore it's on him to write out the emancipation. The second master acquires him, and the sale does not go back. And when Shmuel was talking about Yovel, selling a property on the year of Yovel, that in that case the sale would the money would be returned to the buyer. Where it says Rav Onan Brisa Shmilei. Rav Onan did not hear of this Brisa. The Imi de Shmuel Imayd Enim Machur Mois Chayzer and Dilma Enim Machur Mois Matana. 1 second. All right. Rav Onan did not know the brisa that says that supports the opinion of Shmuel. In other words, that if the slave was sold and the master has deceived him into leaving Israel in order to sell him, the slave goes out free. That's a brisa that supports Shmuel. And that brisa clearly indicates that the sale is valid. Rav Onan did not want to prove from Shmuel's own statement, which is exactly the same as the brisa, because there could be another explanation to Shmuel, which is that instead of the sale being valid and that therefore the money is kept, it could be that the money is actually a gift. We have a similar concept of Shmuel somewhere else. Somebody who gives kedushin to his sister. To itmar, somebody who marries a sister. You can't marry your sister. No marriage. Rav says mois chayzer, the money goes back. A Shmuel Amar mois matana. Shmuel, however, says the money is a gift. So therefore, maybe over here also the money would be a gift. That's why it was necessary to bring the brisa, because Shmuel could be according to his own opinion. The brisa, presumably, however, is not necessarily according to Shmuel's opinion, and therefore is justified by saying that actually the sale is valid. And the second master has to free him. Amli Abayla Rav Yosef. Abayla asks Rav Yosef, why are we penalizing the buyer? Why don't we penalize the seller? So listen closely to the logic, but don't ask me any questions until we finish. So he says to him, Lav achbar ganav elachur ganav. So you have a rat, right? It steals stuff. If anyone remembers the beginning of Mesechus Pesachim, the rat is always the one carrying the chametz, steals the chametz, goes and hides it somewhere. It's not the rat that stole the chametz, it's the hole that he put it into. I.e., the buyer. The buyer is the method that the rat uses to steal. So even though the seller here is the rat stealing, he's violating the rule, and the buyer is giving him a place to put it. So we need to penalize the hole that has the chametz, that has the stuff the rat stole. Amrleis, he says, if not for the rat that stole something, what difference would having a hole in the wall make? So he says to him, the logic is not who did the action, but where is the prohibition? Where is the slave? It's in the hole now. It's by the buyer, and therefore we penalize the buyer. A few stories here are who Avid Ark Mechutz La'aretz Eretz Yisrael. He was a slave that ran from outside of Israel to Israel. Ozal Maria Basrei, the master chased after him. Also, like Rav Ami, he says to Rav Ami, "Amarlei nefta v'chal shtar adamah, because of Gittin de Cherusa." He says to him, he says, "I'd like you to accept the fact that the slave is going to pay you his value, and you have to emancipate him. V'ilai, and if not, I will free him from you." Meter of Achiv Rabbi Yasha, like the statement of Rabbi Achiv Yasha. The Tanya we learned. You shouldn't live in their lands because maybe they'll cause you to sin. Okay, what does that mean? Who's that referring to? Maybe it's talking about a idol worshiper who's committed not to worship idols. See, the verses tells him don't live in the lands that have idol worshippers. Talmud Loimar, the verse continues, Leisasker Eved el Adonov. don't lock up a slave to his master. If he's running away from his master, don't force him to go back. What's the solution? He should rest among you. Okay, so what's this a reference to? What exactly are we talking about? Or it's me'im Hashem, it's really from God. In other words, what we're saying, that the first explanation would be that we're talking about a non-Jew that wants to live amongst you. Don't force him to go back to the lands that have idol worship. What? So the Gemara says, if that's the case, it says he runs me'im adainav, he runs away from his master. He's not running from his master, he's running from gods. Right? He's running from the gods, the idols of the countries around you that are steeped in idol worship. So that's not what it's talking about. Ella, what's it talking about? We're talking about somebody who sells a slave to outside of Israel. The Kashli Rabachi, so Rabachi Bar Yashi had the following question. His son. He's not running to you. In this case, he's being sold from you. Right? You're taking him out of Israel. The verses seems to imply that sort of you're saving him. Don't the slave comes to you to be saved, don't push him back. Over here, it's the opposite. You're not saving him. You're the one who's pushing him outside of Israel, by selling him outside of Israel. So the son of Rabbi Yashia says, we're talking about a slave who's running from outside of Israel to Israel. And such a person, you don't force him to go back to serve his master outside of Israel. In other words, we force the master to free him and take his monetary value instead. Tanya Idach, another bright says, what is this verse referring to? It's referring to somebody who buys a slave with the intention of freeing him. Hechidami, how does that happen? He writes in the purchase document, after I buy you, you should be free. So basically, we have three opinions here on how to interpret this verse. One says we're talking about somebody who sells a slave outside of Israel. The other version says we're talking about a slave that runs from outside of Israel to Israel. And a third version that says we're talking about a slave who was purchased with the intention of freeing him. Loy saska, don't continue to keep him in bondage. Free him immediately. Okay. Anyway, regardless, the end of the story was that Rav Ami held like this second version, which is a slave that runs away, and he told him accept his value, or if not, I'm freeing him anyway. Because when a slave runs away from outside of Israel to Israel, he effectively acquires his freedom, whether by fiat or whether by sale. In other words, he'll pay for himself.
All right,
Right.
Is this a Jewish slave or half Jewish or
Half Jewish, everything. Okay. Rav Chizda had a slave that ran away to Beikusoi, which is outside of Israel. Shalach lahus, he sent them, Hadrunili, I'd like my slave back. Shalach ulei, Leisasker Eved Aldoinav. Asher Yinotzal, he said, the verse states that if he runs away, we don't return him. Okay, so skip the parentheses. Shalach lahu, he sent them back. Hahu be'evet shebarach mechutz la'aretz. That's talking about a slave that runs to Israel. So the Gemara says, why did he send him that? There's three versions of this. Why was that the version that he chose? The truth of the matter is, any version here actually works, because all three versions preclude a slave that ran from one place outside of Israel to another place outside of Israel. So the Gemara says, he thinks that was he likes his interpretation best. Says the Gemara, Abaya lost a donkey in this same town of Beikusai. Shalach lahu, he sent them shadruli, send me back my donkey. Shalach lei, they said to him, how do we know it's yours? Shalach samana, send back the signs. Shalach lahu, so they sent it back. So Abaya sent back the chiver crazy. It has a white stomach. Stomach is lighter than the rest of the animal. So what's the problem with that?
All of them, all the donkeys look like.
Shalach leis, they send him back. Ila derachmeni atleh mishadron aleini elach. If not for the fact that your name was Nachmani, i.e., that you're a great rabbi, we would not have accepted that. Is it not the case that every single donkey has a wide stomach? No dice. Okay. Okay, over here, the Gemara is a little bit significantly easier for today, and try to move here a little quicker. These are very famous Gemaras, very important, actually, unfortunately, very important for the modern day. But a lot easier for the rest of the parak. Okay, you cannot redeem captives more than they're worth. Because of tikkun ha'olam. We'll have to explain exactly what that means. The perfection of the world. Okay, to rectify the world. We'll explain that. One second. And they translate. Was that? Right. We don't help them escape because of tikkun ha'olam. Because of to save captives. Okay, so we'll explain all of this. This tikkun ha'olam. Is this because we don't want to put too much on the tzibur, on the community? In other words, the tzibur can't afford it. Or is it so that they don't catch other Jews and raise the prices? They think this is a very worthwhile business. In other words, the question is: this is a macro problem, or is this a micro problem? In other words, is this a problem that sort of generally reflects all Jewish communities, or is this a question about a specific community? What's the difference? Toshma, the difference would be if he has a wealthy relative who's willing to privately pay a fortune. There's a famous story, Marami Rotenberg was captive. They wanted 15,000 gold gulden to redeem him. They did not allow the community to redeem him. He said, if you redeem me, eventually what happened was he died in prison. His body remained in prison for 15 years until eventually somebody redeemed him. Wealthy man privately. Anyway, okay, so what happened? Where are we? So that's sort of the question. So Gemara says, Tashma, let's try to prove this. The Levi Bar Darga, there was a wealthy man whose name was Levi Bar Darga. Parke Labarte, he redeemed his daughter, but Kleser Alpha Dinner Resolve for 13,000 gold coins. Okay, evidently you see that privately the sale is valid, which means that it's just because we don't want to put too much on the community and not because we're concerned that they'll actually try to take more Jewish captives. Abaya says, who said he did this with the consultation of the rabbis? Maybe he did this against the will of the rabbis. Okay. The debate here is, so one does not help captives escape. What's the difference of opinion? My benai, what's the difference? As follows. We don't help a captive escape. Why? Because we're concerned that if he escapes, then they're going to put everybody else in chains. In other words, everybody else will be sent to the slammer. This is solitary. Is this because the other captives with him will be sent to solitary? That's because of the takanas shavuyim. Because we're concerned about the other captives that are together with him. What happens if he's the only Jewish captive? Fine, help him escape. Why not? However, if it's because of tikkun ha'olam, because they'll know that the Jews help each other escape, so then they'll put all the pirates will put Jews in solitary when they're in captivity. So that's the debate between the Rav Shimon Gamliel and the rabbis. Rav Shimon Gamliel says if there's only one captive, you're allowed to help him escape. And the rabbis say no, it's sort of a meta problem, macro problem, and therefore it remains prohibited. Okay, interesting story. Ban Sidir of Nachman, the daughters of Rav Nachman, Bikshin Kedera B'Yadayu. When they had a boiling pot of water, they would mix it with their own hands. They dip their pot into the boiling hot soup and then mix it. Okay, it wasn't clear. Is this because that they were on Kash Leather Rav Ilish? Rav Ilish watched this. He observed this happening, and he was concerned here. He says, "Is this witchcraft? We live very close to Salem here, or is this because of they're truly worthy?" He says, "Adam echad me'elef matzasi." I found a great man, 1 in 1,000. V'isha b'cholela lo matzasi. But a great woman in 1,000 I've not found. In other words, Rav Ilish was saying it's extremely unlikely that these are so spiritually refined that they're able to actually mix the boiling pot with their bare hands. So he says, there are these daughters of Rav Nachman. They seem to appear to be spiritually refined. So this question of Rav caused a sad event to occur. Vishtavian, the daughters of Rav Nachman were captured, and obviously, captivity here was not just slavery, but also sexual servitude as well. And he was put in captivity together with them. He was sitting. Rav Elish was in captivity. He's sitting next to this guy who knows how to hear the sounds of birds. Also, Urva, a raven, comes and starts chirping to the guy. This bird expert. He's talking to him. Amrlei, my kamar. What's he saying? Amrlei. So the bird reader tells him, Elish Baruch, Elish Baruch. The raven saying, Elish, run away. Amar, Sir Rav Elish says, Urva shikrahu. A raven lies. I'm not relying. The dove came. The kakaria and the dove starts chirping in the guy's ear. He says to him, what's he saying? He's saying, Elish Baruch, Elish Baruch. Elish, run away. Amar, he says, Knesset Yisrael, kiyayna mesila. It's compared to a yayna. Shma mina mishrachas nisa, a miracle will happen and I'm running away. Amar, he says, Izal exli bansidir of Nachman. I'm going to go check on the daughters of Nachman. If they look like they're, very sincerely, spiritually refined, Adrino, I'm going to take them back with me. And he heard them talking in the bathroom. Amar, they said, Nashi kol milid islu sidron lahadadi b'beisakisi shaminu. When the women want to talk privately, they talk in the bathroom, so the captors won't hear them talking. And he heard them saying, Shaminu de Kamran, Adi govern v'nardoi govern. Our pirates are our husbands, and in our Hardoi we have our Jewish husbands. Let's tell our captives to move to a farther place, so that our real husbands don't hear about it and redeem us. I.e., they fell in love with their pirates. Stockholm syndrome, right? First example. Okay. Anyway, he says obviously they're not so righteous. Come Arak, he ran away. Also Iyuvahu Gavro. He ran away together with that guy who understood the language of the birds. Ihu is Rakish, the day is Rakish Hanisa, over Bimavro, who Gavra Shlechu Vikatlu. There was a miracle that happened. He was able to jump over a river and the captors could not get him. The other guy was not able to cross the river and the captors caught him and killed him. He came back, and they asked him what happened to the daughters of Nachman. Amr Havkabakshan, Kidra Bikshafim. They were using witchcraft to mix stir their pots with witchcraft with their bare hands. It was not because they were spiritually refined. The daughters of Nachman were not, unfortunately, up to par. That ends. Continue tomorrow. We'll go through this a little bit. Talk about Sefer Torah and other things.